Welcome back to the programme. Let's get a reminder now of our top story on Euronews this hour. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced tough new sanctions against Russia, including a complete ban on oil imports by the end of this year. But Hungary and Slovakia say they'll seek exemptions. The measures will also target Russia's banks and so-called disinformation actors. Well, let's cross over to Strasbourg to speak to our correspondent, Shona Murray, who has been listening to what Ursula von der Leyen has had to say. Shona, good to see you there. Tell us, give us some more details on what Ursula von der Leyen told Parliament. This is the sixth round of sanctions now against Russia. How much stronger are these?
Well, as yet, sixth round of sanctions containing sanctioning of high-ranking military officers and others individuals responsible for the war crimes in Bucha. There's also a sanctioning of 3 Russian state TV channels. There's finally the sanctioning of Russian Sberbank, which is Russia's largest bank, which makes up of 37% of the Russian banking industry, and 2 other smaller banks, also Belarusian banks. And of course, Tokes, the issue we've been sort of waiting for in relation to the detail, finally an oil embargo, a permanent phasing out of Russian oil from Europe within the next couple of years. What's interesting about it is there's a talk of sort of 6-month period for the majority of EU member states, but I'm hearing that the special dispensation that Hungary and Slovakia are looking for, in particular Hungary, could be until the end of next year. Now, some of this detail has to be worked out between the member states, of course, because these are Commission proposals, but that's what we're hearing so far. Tokes?
Shona, if Hungary and Slovakia do succeed in getting this exemption to this oil ban, won't that significantly weaken this action?
Well, they will get the exemption. It depends, I suppose, for how long that exemption is for, because it's come as a surprise that Hungary might get the exemption to the end of next year. But of course, this has to be fully agreed by the member states. And certainly you're right to a point there, Toast, because every MEP I've spoken to here in Strasbourg in relation to that is not happy that they're getting that exemption. They think that all EU member states should work in lockstep when it comes to these sanctions. But those 2 countries say that phasing out too soon of Russian oil would be too harmful for their economies, Hungary taking 100% of its oil from Russia. But I suppose the other bigger picture is that the most important thing is that the bigger economies and at least 27 member states are phasing out permanently Russian oil, in particular countries like Germany. Germany was taking around 30% of its oil from Russia. They've managed to reduce that to 12% in the past few weeks, which is a good enough diversification.
In the last leg of his 3-day visit to Europe, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is meeting French President Emmanuel Macron. Euronews reporter David Chazan has more on what to expect from their talks.
India's neutral stance on Russia's invasion of Ukraine will be high on the agenda at the talks in Paris between President Macron and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So far, Modi's resisted pressure from Macron and other Western leaders, including Germany's Olaf Scholz and Britain's Boris Johnson, to change India's position on Ukraine. But India wants to deepen trade and defence links with France, and it also wants a free trade deal with the European Union. Western sanctions on Russia have opened up new business opportunities in Europe for Indian companies. But those same companies also want to expand trade with Russia. India has increased its imports of oil and gas from Russia in recent months, and it shrugged off Western criticism, saying that Europe still consumes far more Russian energy than it does. India also imports much of its military hardware from Russia, so it's walking a diplomatic tightrope between the West and Moscow. It's refused to condemn the invasion of Ukraine, but it has called for a ceasefire. David Chazan in Paris for Euronews.
Earlier, I spoke to Sushant Singh, a senior fellow at the Centre for Policy Research, on how Narendra Modi's visit is being viewed back in India. Well, thanks for taking time to speak to us here on the programme. We've heard about India's stance on the Ukraine war and how highly that's going to figure in the talks today. But how is this meeting being viewed in India? Is Narendra Modi coming under criticism for leaving the country amidst this heat wave?
Not really. Mr. Modi's visit to Europe has not come under any criticism because of the heat wave or because of the economic crisis that India is facing. Mr. Modi's visit, in fact, to Europe is seen as a measure taken to pacify Europe, to re-engage with Europe after India took a position on Ukraine, where it has not criticized Russia at all. And this is something which is figured in his meetings in Berlin and in Denmark as well, where foreign leaders, European leaders have asked India to intervene and ensure that the war gets over very quickly. Secondly, Mr. Modi's visit to Paris, to France particularly, is seen as a part of a very strong strategic partnership that India and France have established over the years, in which defense cooperation, nuclear cooperation, space cooperation, geostrategic cooperation has taken place.
You mentioned all those areas of mutual concern for both, but how big a role does India then have as a strategic partner, not only potentially to the EU, but also to Russia?
India's relationship with Russia is very strong, goes back deep into history during the Soviet Union era, but primarily the functional part of the relationship, the transactional part of the relationship deals with defense supplies. Nearly 2/3 of India's military supplies come from Russia, and it is not possible for India to take on two adversaries at two fronts, Pakistan and China, without the kind of support that it needs from Russia at this point in time.
Well, let's talk more about what exactly Narendra Modi is going to be wanting from Emmanuel Macron. We saw yesterday that they secured, or Narendra Modi rather, secured deals with Denmark to sort of take its green technology, according to the ambassador, into orbit. Tell us more about its defensive needs.
India wanted to construct some new age submarines with France. India wants to construct a new jet engine with France. Only 5 countries have jet engine technology, and France is one of those. France is one of those countries which has jet engine technologies. India, of course, had signed the big Rafale aircraft deal with France under Mr. Modi. So defense supplies, essentially defense joint production, transfer of defense technology to India. That is one big focus area of Mr. Modi's trip to France. But we must also recognize that Mr. Modi's trip to France is also to acknowledge that this is a multipolar world in which India comes under tremendous pressure from countries like the US for its position on democratic issues, on the freedom of press, treatment of religious minorities, and freedom of speech in India. And those are the kind of questions which, at this point in time, Europe is not really raising with Mr. Modi.
Pope Francis has told an Italian newspaper he had offered to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in a bid to end his assault on Ukraine. In an interview with Corriere della Sera, the pontiff suggested that NATO's expansion eastwards may have prompted the invasion. While His Holiness has avoided rebuking Putin or Moscow by name, he is also seeking to repair relations with the Russian Orthodox Church. The Kremlin has yet to respond. Hargudodo in southeastern Ethiopia has hardly had a drop of rain in 18 months. The United Nations says the conflict between government forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front has left 9 million people in need of emergency food aid. The lack of rain has killed nearly 1.5 million head of livestock in what the OCHA are calling the worst drought to hit the Horn of Africa in decades. Liverpool are through to the UEFA Champions League final in Paris after beating Villarreal 3-2 in the second leg at the Ceramica Stadium. This will be the Reds' third Champions League final in 5 seasons under manager Jurgen Klopp. Unai Emery's men were off to a flying start with 2 goals from Boulaye Dia and Francis Collin before half-time. But in the second half, Liverpool torpedoed the Yellow Submarine with 3 goals in 15 minutes from Fabinho, Diaz and Mané. The other finalists will be decided this evening at Santiago Bernabeu Stadium when Real Madrid take on Manchester City.
That's it from me and the team here at our headquarters in Lyon. Don't forget you can stay in touch with us via social media and stay up to date with our latest stories on our website, euronews.com.